Welcome, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Leading with Inclusion, a conversation on Black women's mental health in the workplace. My name is Shira Bornstein, VP of Engagement at YW Boston. I believe we have folks with us today that are both longtime friends of YW Boston and new to our community. For those of you that are new, YW Boston is a nonprofit dedicated to racial and gender equity. We share the same mission as YWCAs across the country, but each YWCA, or YW Boston as we call ourselves, implements the mission distinctly based on the needs of our local communities. Here in Boston, we identify as a feminist, anti-racist organization driven to create spaces where people of color, women, and particularly women of color can thrive. And gender expansive people of color can thrive. This webinar stems from our Leading with Inclusion series, an ongoing initiative designed to provide DEI professionals with the insights, inspiration, and practical solutions needed to navigate diversity and inclusion challenges in today's rapidly changing environment. Driven to meet the moment, lean into our planned strategic planning, and with the leadership of Abba Taylor as our new president and CEO, we are piloting speaking not just to DEI and HR leaders, but also directly to audiences we aspire to serve, women and gender expansive people of color, recognizing the deep Venn diagram between the two groups. Additionally, we've been leaning into wellness, both internally and externally, as both part of our organizational growth work and as an outcome of it. This webinar fuses our audiences and topics. Mental health and wellness for women of color, particularly Black women, is critical and under attack. The workplace has been particularly vicious for Black women. Recent data from economist Katika Roy cites that 300,000 Black women have left the labor force in 3 months. In this webinar, we want Black women to understand that they're not alone, empower Black women to care for themselves, and critically, because the brunt of this work should be on the environments, not the individuals, empower organizations and institutions structurally and interpersonally to create environments where Black women can thrive. Please join me in welcoming today's moderator, Abba Taylor, President and CEO of YW Boston.
Thank you, Shira. Thank you for that. That statistic around the number of Black women that have lost their jobs is something that just literally makes my skin crawl. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. And I know that we're going to be talking about mental health, Black women mental health in the workplace, but also just generally speaking. And I hope that folks can come out of this really thinking about tools that they may have or want or need, but also what organizations and spaces can do. As Shira said, it's not just about individuals fixing the problem, and certainly not Black women. So firstly, I just want to really thank everyone for coming to this webinar. I know those of us who are organizing it and our amazing speakers, like it's something we're all really passionate about. And so I want to just thank everyone for being here, specifically the Black women who are on this call, the women of color, and the allies for folks who don't identify as Black women, but came because, you know, this is an important topic. Just wanted to thank you for coming. I don't need to talk about how DEI has been under attack for the last several years and exponentially so this past year, and how that is obviously impacting Black women in the workforce. You know, there's an understanding that oftentimes Black women are the ones with the highest level of ambitions against any other identity group. And so navigating these environments where they are often overlooked, undervalued, or actively harmed is a real critical issue when we think about inclusion, belonging, equity, and diversity in the workplace. So with this webinar, we are going to really focus on the mental health of Black women. And I would argue, you know, if you understand targeted universalism, the effects and the impacts of supporting Black women can actually support and have a positive effect on folks across all identities, gender, racial identities. So we really want to promote wellness in the workplace and thinking explicitly, but not exclusively, about Black women. we're going to have a candid conversation around mental health and organizational change that is possible and make that really direct connection between racism and mental health outcomes. And there's such an abundance of literature and discourse around that. So this is, as I always like to say, this is like a little tapas, a little appetizer teaser, but our panelists are so well versed in their respective fields and in the work that they do. And there's so much to learn from in this opportunity. Lastly, I just want to say that our panelists also bring such rich lived experiences. They have such deep knowledge. And we are going to be talking about Boston, but also the broader, society and thinking about organizational change. And I am not going to, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves because, I would probably spend an hour praising each of them. But I'm very much looking forward to this conversation and ready to dive in. So please join me in welcoming Carrie Grogan, Naisha Deed, and Yannick Redwood. And as you all prepare your what you want to say about yourself, this is they don't know that I'm saying this, but I would love to invite each of you to share as part of your bio one thing that you do to really take care of your mental health personally. That could be what brings you joy, something that you do for rest or restoration, but what's one thing that you personally do to take care of your mental health? So I'm inviting you to include that as you introduce yourselves.
Good morning. I'll go first. My name is Naisha Deed, and I'm the founder and CEO of an organization here in Boston called Pure Spark, where we help Black folks connect with Black mental health and wellness practitioners, whether it's on the Western side of wellness, where it's therapists, psychiatrists, nurse practitioners, or on the Eastern side, where we're looking at yoga teachers, traditional Chinese medicine practitioners, and the like. And it's hard for me to think of just one because there's so many that I do. um, but the one thing that I've been doing a lot recently is energy work, like qigong. That's something that helps me to like release negative energy and welcome in positive, high vibrational energy. And it's something that I do every day because sometimes we wake up in a mood, right? Depending on what happened the day before, and we have to reset. And I will reset as much as I need to in order for me to kind of push through the day with whatever intentions that I have. So I will pass it to Unique.
Thank you, Naisha. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Yannick Redwood. I am the author of a book called White Women Cry and Call Me Angry, a Black woman's memoir on racism in philanthropy. Prior to becoming an author, I led a private foundation in Washington, D.C. that was focused on racial equity and racial justice. I did that for about 10 years in the very white woman-dominated field of philanthropy. And I wrote a book about my experience, which is now being adapted into a film. I also support organizations that are working toward equity and justice. And the one thing of the many things, because this is such a journey, it requires so many modalities, at least for me, and I'll talk to that later. My mindfulness practice is, it's just so important for me to stop throughout the day. I tend to go, 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 as many of us do. And it's just a reminder to stop, to bring myself into the present, to check in with myself. And I have some little tools that I use, like this little gift boxes on my desk with little pieces of paper that I can pull, and it will tell me something I can do to take a break. So really, it's about centering throughout the day is one of my practices. And I'll pass it to Carrie.
Hi, everyone. So so honored to be part of this panel and this group. My name is Carrie Grogan. I am lead principal of client services for Mindshare Partners. We are a nonprofit focused on cultivating workplaces where both employees and organizations can thrive. In my day-to-day work, I consult and advise and train companies on workplace mental health strategy and really trying to cultivate places where we can both lift up employees who are experiencing challenges, but also design workplaces so that they are not further inhibiting or challenging folks' well-being and mental health. For me personally, I am really oftentimes focused on my community and the people who surround me and bring me joy. And so in my hardest days, I usually am reaching out to my friends and my colleagues, and I really love sending notes. It is a practice that my grandma put me in from birth, basically, and I have a collection of cards and postcards and notes that I will go through when I am having the crappiest day, and I will find someone to send a card to. And it also has that delayed response because then a few days later I hear from them because they got a card from me, and it boosts me up. It lets me put something into a space. And I have really found that to be one of the best ways to take care of my mental health and give me a boost when I'm struggling. How about back to you?
I love that. I love that. And as I was asking the question, I was like, I know y'all have way more than one thing, but again, could easily spend our entire time talking about that. So I just want to, before we get started with the questions, wanted to let folks know that we are going to have a conversation. You know, I approach this like I would be talking to these three amazing women in the room. So we'll flow with it. If folks have questions, they can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom to submit questions. And we have our team in the background who will be reviewing those questions and sharing them with me because I can't multitask like that. And there is one comment I just wanted to lift up about, oh, maybe it's already something about fans. You got that? Okay, so do what you will. But let's jump in. So starting with workplaces, you know, I think there is definitely this reckoning of ways in which the environments, the workplace environments contribute to employee stress. I saw an article a couple weeks ago, and I can't remember where it was, about how workplaces are the #1 source of people's mental health, right? The workplace stress is the #1 source. So when you think about that specifically with Black women, it feels even more important. There was a report from 2022, Black Women Thriving, that showed 34% of respondents agreed with the statement, "I feel emotionally safe at work." Only 34 respondents agreed with that. And in 2021, there was another study where 84% of respondents said that at least one workplace factor that had a negative impact on them, was the workplace factor was that had a negative impact was their mental health. So thinking about workplaces specifically, what are some key factors that do impact Black women's mental health in the workplace? And Carrie, I'm going to ask you to start us off to think about, you know, the work that you're doing at Mindshare Partners and how the workplace is contributing to Black women's mental health.
Well, in general, there's a number of workplace factors that negatively impact mental health, right? Regardless of your identity. That's underuse of skills, excessive workloads, high pace of work, understaffing, long hours, lack of control over your job, limited support from a supervisor, unclear job role. There's so many things that can add stress and strain to our day to day. And for women and people of color, there's risks like under promotion, job insecurity, poor investment and career growth, and conflicting home and work demands that have a really significant impact as well. And then Black folks regularly experience higher unemployment rates, lower pay and fewer benefits, and work in jobs that are less stable and those that are as opposed to those that are held by white workers. And so we know Black women have been particularly impacted in the current labor market with rollbacks in DEI and cuts to federal staffing. And those are areas where Black women have found career stability and growth. I also see a lot of folks in higher education on this call. That's my background as well. And we're seeing cuts there that are impacting women and Black women in particular. So we know Black employees face higher scrutiny. That is a study that's been shown as well. And I know personally, I tend to be a rule follower for this reason. And I want to really understand expectations in a way that it seems sometimes my white colleagues don't. Um, Experiencing that sort of differentiation in the workplace, experiencing discrimination is also a major risk factor for developing mental health conditions. And so pile all of those factors onto stigma, cultural beliefs, access to resources, access to high quality support, and we can see why the overall mental health of Black women is uniquely challenged.
Naisha, do you want to add more about, and do you want to say anything more, especially given your experiences?
Wow, I feel like Carrie just went all the way in and named so much. One thing that I will say, and we might talk about this later, is that in my experience, I've experienced managers that Carrie might have identified, right, where it's like super rigid and there's like these high expectations, and you're afraid to speak up because what is that gonna look like, right? I understand how I'm perceived as a Black woman in the workplace, especially when I was working in corporate accounting. It's a particularly white male dominated space, right? And so I don't want to look like the weakest link, And so oftentimes we don't speak up and we don't say anything in fear of, well, what is that going to look like? And I think that, uh, you know, when we're looking at what a healthier workplace culture can look like for people to have improved mental health, we're looking at managers who, lead with compassion. I can remember working in the workplace and having a manager who was just so thoughtful and was just so kind. And I'm like, wow, I didn't even know that this type of leadership was possible, right? And a lot of us don't realize, we think that we have to act and be a certain way in order to be successful. I also internalized that and became very sick, right? And then when becoming sick and not well mentally, I still don't speak up, right? Because now, oh my gosh, I'm dealing with something real that is causing my cognitive ability to do my job decrease. And the more and more I push, the worse and worse I feel, but I'm afraid, right? And so this feeling of fear to speak up and to say how we truly feel um, is hindering us and is causing us harm. But it's also understandable because of the environments that we're in that don't allow us to be able to feel safe, right? Like you stated, only 34% of people, I think, feel safe in the workplace.
Yeah, yeah. That's actually a really wonderful segue to the next question, and I can open it up to all of you, but Naisha, you just spoke to it, just your own personal journey in navigating mental health in professional spaces. And I love what you said about leadership, right? It's something I think about a lot. We offer leadership programs at YW, and as a Black woman myself, be leading differently is such a challenge in and of itself, right? Because the models that we who were born and raised in the United States have of leadership is often white men in a very dominant, very, just not the kind of leadership that I personally believe we need. So being able to find those models and or just navigate being in leadership roles or being aspiring to leadership roles, especially as Black women, I think that is something, we could have a whole nother conversation about. But, I'd love to hear from any of you, just in addition to what has already been shared, what are some of the ways that you've had to navigate the workplace and, balancing your mental health? this, or professional spaces. It could be the workplace, it could be other places where you weren't feeling supported. So what did you do to be able to survive in those kinds of spaces? Yannick,
Yeah,
I can get to you if you want.
happy to jump in here. I do want to say that these workplaces are situated within a broader context of racism and the blend of racism and capitalism, right? And how we have been conditioned to produce, right? And I really want to like weave that in today. Is that I remember reading an article that introduced me to why the clock has a minute hand and a second hand. And these were all innovations to watch how much productivity we can get out of people. Even this morning, I remember journaling about, Unique, you're not a machine, right? And we have been conditioned to believe and act as if we're machines and we're not. So I just want to just put that in the context of racial capitalism.
Absolutely.
One thing that I also want to share is that I think sometimes mental health challenges predate our workplace experiences. Excuse me. That was the case for me. I was dealing with mental health struggles that were a direct result of early childhood trauma. And I think I was drawn to the helping professions, drawn to justice, right? It was a source of drive and passion for me to undo the harms that exist in our communities, our neighborhoods, our families. And so I just wonder, right? It's a wondering how many of us on this call were drawn to justice because we're carrying wounds from either abuse or growing up without enough.
Mhm.
And so my book starts out with an essay, and you'll get this link when you get a list of resources. It's a link to 3 essays, and the first essay is called The Search. And it's really about grief from the recent or distant past in your life that lives in your bones. Like, what is that? And how does that grief actually influence why you chose to do the work that you do? So that's one point. The second point I want to make is that, so then we've got the previous stuff, right, from childhood. Then we experience the effects of redlining in our neighborhoods. Our families, because of racism, don't have enough. So we're supporting multiple people on our salaries. I know this is true for Black women. Then we enter the workplace and experience racial trauma. All of this, it just interlocks, it compounds, it keeps compounding until we burn out. And so it wasn't until actually when I wrote the book that I was here just hearing from hundreds and hundreds of Black women saying, this book finally is like saying what has happened to me, what I've experienced, and has given me permission to begin the healing process. And so the point here is that you're not alone, we're not alone. The more we tell our stories, the more we have these kinds of conversations, I believe we begin to collectively heal from all of the trauma, right? Not just the ones in the workplace, but the ones that predate the workplace, the ones that are in our neighborhoods, our communities. But the first step, I think, is us having these very vulnerable conversations with each other.
Absolutely. The chat is blowing up and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the hardest thing I've had to moderate because I'm so excited by everything you're saying. And I literally want to say hello to every single person who's on the call right now and who's in the chat and just responding. And it's clearly we need to be having these conversations. And what you're saying is really landing for folks. So just thank you, thank you, thank you. Does anyone else, Carrie or Naisha, do you want to speak to this question of survival? And I love, Yannick, that you named workplaces. Yes, we're talking about that, but that's one institution of a whole system that we grow up in and have to find our way through, right? And the compounding effect of all of these traumas, can be exacerbated in the workplace. But I really like that you are naming that we can identify what's outside of the workplace as well and where some of that is rooted, because it's all connected always.
I just want to echo you, Abba. Like, thank you so much, Unique, for talking about how expansive this is and talking about the root of it, because the root definitely predates going into the workplace and even predates us being born, right? It's like it's epigenetics. It's there's a long, long history of it. And sometimes when I think about it, I'm overwhelmed, but we have to name it, right? And so just thank you so much for naming that.
So let's talk about the healing process, right? We know that it looks different for everyone. And as we just named, there are sort of multiple factors. And even with your introductions, there's multiple modalities for ways of healing. It's definitely not linear. We know that, right? We can make 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. So it's obviously a journey. And I'd love to hear from any of you kind of how you have been able to, or what resources have been available to support either workplace burnout or just navigating racism in the workplace, or even just self-care, right? There are also some juicy questions that are coming up in the chat, so I want to make sure we get to them before our time is out. But can any of you speak to healing modalities and processes in the workplace? And again, that individuals or organizations and or allies can take on to support.
I'll hop in briefly just to say that some of these modalities that, like, let's say I practice aren't necessarily like written in literature per se, right? It's more of a feelings thing. And what do I mean by that? So I think after the pandemic, I realized obviously we were talking more about mental health. And I opened up about my story around that same time. And just the idea of feeling seen, right? Like me saying something and talking about my experience and someone affirming me was so healing, right? Like, you are also going through this. You also experienced this in the workplace. Like, I thought it was just me, right? And a weight kind of lifts. And so, one of the things that I did after like leaving the workplace initially was really kind of heavy on the Western focus of healing, right? It was going into the hospital, it was talking to a therapist, it was medication, um, and it worked to stabilize me, but really like the real deep work that I had to do um, really was around kind of letting go of like false beliefs that I carried, and figuring out like, wow, what are these thoughts that are coming through my mind? Like, where am I picking these up from? And how do I release them? And how do I take in like more positive kind of thought patterns? And that takes time, that takes work. Like you said, like the healing journey is a long one. And so recently, I've been working with a traditional Chinese medicine doctor to kind of help to purge out, like physically, mentally, and spiritually, all the things that I've been holding on to. Like, and why am I holding on to it? Like, it's time to release it,
Mm.
and kind of transition into a being that has, different thoughts that can kind of help me propel and to do the work that I was put on this earth to do.
I just want to share how grateful I am that the conversation is about healing. I think so often when we are talking about mental health and care for yourself and for your mental health, it's built around resilience. And Black women have already demonstrated resilience by existing, right? Like just in the face of adversity. And so instead of focusing on resilience, thinking about healing allows us to really address the structures and the policies that are needed to change so that we can create workplaces where everyone can be successful, right? And so we have to pursue our own practices to repair harms and burnout while also restructuring the way that we work and the way that work gets done. And so yes, pursuing professional mental health support in whatever avenue that looks like, understanding the importance of seeking support from people with shared experiences and perspectives, that culturally competent care is really important. We can build community and mentorship because we know that isolation breeds challenges, and also just role modeling what self-care looks like, exactly what Naisha and Unique are doing here today, and sharing those stories and sharing how we care for ourselves. That reduces the stigma around mental health and normalizes what these behaviors can look like, and really sets expectations for what professional success looks like, right? Like, we can be professional and be open about how challenging it can be to be successful and what it takes for us realistically to be successful. Sharing those stories really allows us to find healing because it gives permission for other people to do the same. I want to point out that in the follow-up, I'm sharing a template to create a personal mental health action plan that might be useful, but also a worksheet from the nonprofit ETR that myself and my team have really used, because it provides some coping strategies that go beyond like meditation or yoga. Like, there's so much more to think about in building your own mental health strategy. And so I hope that those resources shared afterwards can be helpful.
I just want to echo Naisha with the Western styles and then the other supports. Let me tell y'all, on this call, I have done all of it. Right? Like, I'm just going to go through them. I've done the cognitive behavioral therapy, right, to help me with managing anxiety, trauma-based therapy to help me recognize my fight or flight responses, medication, right, to give me space, like to support me so that the therapy could actually take root. I mentioned earlier the mindfulness practice. I actually use Headspace app. It's just, I use it throughout the day. It really just helps me to stay in the moment. I'm a constant journaler. So those are some of the like personal things that I've done. But I think that there's also, I'm always going to take it back to the structural things, right? So I'm also thinking about like what structurally I have done to actually support healing. So I took 6 months off work, which was really difficult to do that because I had zero income coming in. And it was a time where I was like, I've got to deal with this propensity to overwork. Like, what's at the root of it? And the only way I felt I could do that was to not work, right? And so that was an intense period of time where I changed the structure around me, took myself out of the workplace in order to do some healing work. And it was truly transformative for me to be able to do that. The second thing that I did structurally, which I know everybody can't do, but I'm just going to put it in the room, right? I left the United States, so I don't spend a lot of time in the country anymore. I do come back and forth for work and talks and things like that. But I said to myself and my family, like, in order to have less experience of the kind of virulent racism that exists in the United States, not that it doesn't exist everywhere, but there's a particular form of it in the United States. I had to get out of the United States. And so I try to spend most of my time outside so that I am not exposed to that type of racism over and over and over again in my life. So that's the second thing I'll say, that if that is a possibility, even something you're thinking about, I just encourage Black women to explore that. And I've written a second book called We Quit America with my husband. I didn't include it in the resources, but it was a way for me, for us last year, especially last year, to say that this is possible, and that we've shared, like, most of the stories in the book are Black women who are saying enough and leaving the country as one option to pursue freedom from racism. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we need to have a whole nother conversation again about that, because it's really rich, and just being able to get different perspectives, even physically removing yourself or shifting your perspective, can really help sometimes. So thank you, all three of you, for sharing that. And through your responses, you're highlighting very specific ways which individuals can do to navigate. So Carrie, I'm gonna ask you to expand upon what you were speaking about around organizational change, right? And those of us who do DEI work as DEI practitioners, ultimately my bias is that DEI is really about organizational change and shifting practices and culture, right? So can you, Carrie, and others, if you want to speak to, if we wanted to go beyond the sort of surface level DEI initiatives and really integrate wellness into workplace excellence, employee engagement initiatives, what does that look like? What is creating a culture that supports Black women, that supports mental health, that supports the wellness, the well-being of all folks? What are some institutional practices that organizations can employ?
Yeah, so often workplaces and leaders seek out self-care benefits, and that's important, right? Like making sure that you have well-vetted EAPs, benefits, apps, all of those things are part of care. But what workers actually want is good work-life balance. They want flexibility. They want an organizational culture that shifts the way that we work so that it's not harming mental health, right? The norms, the practices, the ways that we do our jobs. And so that means leaders visibly supporting mental health, right? Speaking out about this importance, connecting it to organizational purpose and values. It means managers proactively showing support and responding appropriately when challenges are experienced, right? It's not just are they proactive in sharing resources and thinking about the way we work, but when people experience those challenges to their mental health, how are they responding? Are they navigating those conversations? Are they repairing the workplace factors that are contributing negatively? It's policies that are inclusive of diverse needs. There's regular measurement of goals that can be done so that you make sure that you're aligning with company values. And also thinking about our daily practices and how we show support for mental health. So having more autonomy in the way that folks get their jobs done, flexibility and input into their day to day, right? The extreme amount of oversight has a detrimental effect. And so how can we create more autonomy and flexibility? We can intentionally build connection, community, and belonging at work, which is why the removal of so many DEI practices can be so detrimental, because that work ensures that folks feel like they are not alone and feel like they are not isolated. Creating opportunities for people to actually unplug and restore without penalty, right? Being able to use your time off and get away from work and that be okay and accepted and celebrated. And also creating a positive experience of work with joy and professional growth and advancement and opportunities to utilize our strengths, because your mental health is benefited when you do what you are good at and when you feel really capable and successful in what you're doing. I've also, in the follow-up, included a framework that we use in client work to design mentally healthy workplaces, to really think about this structurally, because we work with organizations to review systems and policies, implement training, and really think about buy-in company-wide to ensure that everyone feels like they have a place in designing a mentally healthy workplace and shifting the ways that we work.
Great, wonderful. Okay, I'm gonna switch to some of the questions that have come up. They're all really good, so I'm gonna kind of try to consolidate, and then I want to make sure that I ask my very last question. Make sure we have time for that. There's also a juicy question that I if we can get to it, around picking up on Yannick, your recommendation about potentially leaving the country. So I just wanna honor that question. We might not have time to get into it, but first and foremost, going back to the workplace again, there's a statement, or a question, how do we encounter excessive workloads when an organization is very used to functioning in the hustle/grind culture and believes it's what leads to exceptionalism, right? And I'm sure so many of us on this call can understand the hustle and grind culture in workplaces. So how do we counter that? And I think for me, I'll add, how do we as individuals, as Black women, as employees, but also as organizations, counter that hustle grind culture?
I've seen questions in the chat too, in particular of how non-Black folks, how allies can really step up. And this is one of those places because upholding boundaries and questioning the way things are done is inherently safer for y'all, right? And so being able to step back and say, okay, is this a priority right now? And if so, what else can be deprioritized? Or here is the workload. Here's what I've got going on. Tell me what needs to happen first, second, third, right? Like help me prioritize because it's just not possible to get all of these things done in this period of time. It's holding leaders accountable for company values. Oftentimes, there are values of employees, of community, of well-being, of ensuring that we are taking care of people. And how does that then come up against these outrageously high expectations? I think a lot about just our normal practices that we then role model for others, right? Even if you are not in a leadership position to be able to question these things, how are you perpetuating those harms? How are you also sending the messages at 8 p.m., 9 p.m., expecting people to turn around responses? How often are you sending emails to people when they are on PTO, when they are on vacation? Are we better able to set folks up so that there are other people who can step in and that we celebrate folks for actually taking the time away, for enabling others around them to be a part of decision making so that it's not falling on just one person? But when that happens, also make sure that we're celebrating everyone in the group, everyone in the team, not just the one who answers the email at 10 p.m., but also celebrating the fact that someone upheld those boundaries and made sure that they took the time away from work to take care of themselves. So I think there's small actions that we can all do, right? Even just adding to your email signature that this is when I'm sending, or this is when works best for me, but reply at your own pace. Those are things that everyone can do, regardless of the power dynamic of the workplace or how much they have a say, how much they are a manager or a leader. But those managers, leaders, and allies can also be pushing back and asking questions to really rethink the way that we're doing things.
Thank you, Carrie. Naisha, Yannick, anything to add there?
The only thing I would add here is, and don't take this the wrong way, because this is not about blaming us. But I would also invite us to think about, or really like interrogate what we get out of being busy all the time, taking on all the projects, being on all the committees. Like in what ways are we validated by these cultures? And I'm speaking from just pure myself. I was validated by how much work I could produce. I was like, oh, they can't touch me because I'll get it done, right? Like that is what I was known for. And so I was validated by that. And so I participated in that, actively participated. And so in addition to the recommendations that Carrie offered about how workplaces can think about honoring their employees and making, healthy workplaces, I invite us to really spend some time, like, what am I getting out of this? And in the resources, you'll get 3 essays from the book. And the one essay that I'm pointing to here is called "A Pleasure Virgin Discovers the Antidote to Whiteness." And that was about me sitting in my therapist's office complaining about work. And my therapist looks at me and asks me, "What do you do every day, Yannick, to please yourself?" And I had no answer because I was just on that production treadmill, right? And just the story of how I started to flip that so that I was grounding myself in what pleases me, what feels good, so that I wouldn't continue to be validated by work making me feel good. So it's a little tricky, right? But I just wanted to offer that, not as a self-blame, but just to be honest with ourselves about what we're getting out of this relationship with work, and how we can start to like flip that
Right.
to live first, work later. Like, how do we make that shift?
Right. I love that, because I think you're also inviting folks to take some ownership in their experience as a way to potentially direct it, right? And not just assume we're just recipients, but we can have some autonomy and ownership over the way. And that does require self-work and self-reflection, and not always like pretty things that we need to look in the mirror and acknowledge. Um, okay, so there are a couple of questions about non-Black people of color. And this is yet another topic that I would love to spend more time on, because I will say that in a lot of the workplaces that I've been in, when I've felt harm, it's been most hurtful from people of color, as a matter of fact. You know, if a white person in a workplace harms me, that's one thing. If I'm feeling that harm from a person of color, it hits different. And it hits even more differently if it's from another Black person or another Black woman. So can any of you speak to how non-Black people, POC colleagues, can positively or negatively impact Black women's mental health in the workplace? Or, you know, what, if we want to just think about positively, what can happen? What can folks do as non-Black allies to positively support Black folks, Black women in the workplace?
Abba, I hope you don't get mad, but there's something that Unique said that just hit me in her last comment that like I really, really identify with. And that's the whole idea of separating ourselves from our work,
Mm,
right? Like
mhm,
I truly identified with the work that I did. It was a part of my self identity. And I even often talk about how when I left, it felt like a divorce. It felt like I was leaving an abusive relationship because I was so tied to it and
mhm.
nothing else was important. And I'm still trying to unlearn that, right? Of like connecting myself to work and the things that I can do versus living out my life and having great life experiences, not be tethered to that. So um just thank you for naming that and bringing that up into the space. And now
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is an direct product of capitalism, right? To identify ourselves with the ways in which we produce.
I can jump in really quickly on your question, Abba. So I tend to not want to answer this question about how we harm each other, because I don't want to shift the focus from all the harm that's happening in workplaces um, at the hands of white folks. I mean, it's over and over again, the research, the literature, all of it suggests that most of the harm is coming from our white colleagues. And because of racial capitalism, we are inside of a broader system where we are trying to succeed, trying to hold it together, trying to manage up to the board. And so we're under, as Black folks, Black women, under so much pressure inside of these systems that we can hurt each other, right? Like we can hurt each other. And so it's real. I know it's real. And at the same time, just wanting to make sure that if we can, if at all possible, even as we're experiencing the harm from someone who looks like us, because I've had that happen too. I just wonder if when we see it, when we feel it, if we can also like think structurally, like what is the system that we're all playing in? What plantation are we all on? And why might that person be acting in this way? What stresses and what forms of racism are they responding to? What am I responding to? Like really putting it in context, because that context really matters. And it's hard. It's hard when it's happening to you and there's harm, but if at all possible, to like really bring it back to the context that we're all operating in, that
Right.
puts us against each other.
Right.
Mhm.
So to reframe that, you know, what can non-Black allies do to support Black folks? What can that support really look like from other people of color, white?
I think just reflecting on my own experiences, what has been so helpful for me is just feeling really heard and understood and validated in what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing. I was taught, right, like fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on you. And that is an act of self-preservation and protection. And so when I have experienced harms in the workplace, it's really difficult to rebuild trust. It's so much easier to just move on, to jump ship and like, all right, well, you fooled me once and I'm out. And to really sit and reflect on what I need in that space to have that trust be repaired, has been an openness to feedback, to actually seeing action being taken based on the feedback I have shared, based on what I have named that I need in the workplace. And even being able to talk through what I would need to feel that harm repaired, what I would need to feel safe and to have that trust be built back again. It's often when I'm talking through that with my non-white colleagues that I'm able to figure that out, that I'm able to really reflect on what I need. And sometimes the harm is too strong and you got to jump ship. Sometimes, though, it is possible. You have to reflect and really figure out what that might look like and what that might need to give people a fighting chance to get back there and to brainstorm what that might look like, what's realistic for what you can ask for and what you might need. It has often been those other colleagues that have really helped me figure that out.
And just to add, Carrie, helping figure it out. And also, if you're a white ally in the workplace, if you are white adjacent, I know that's a tricky language, but if you like straddle those communities and can move between communities of color and white communities, if you are a man, a Black man in the workplace, recognizing that you have some privileges and to name things, right? To name them when you see them. What is not helpful for me at work is when you come after the fact and say, huh, did you notice what happened in that meeting after the fact, after it's all over and I've been harmed, right? Naming things in the moment, and getting skilled on how to do that because it's tricky. There's a book that's I think is pretty helpful in that area. I'll remember it and give it further resources. Like really like stepping in the moment, I think is also helpful in the workplace.
Yeah, it reminds me of a lot of upstander, you know, which is another reframe of bystander interventions, that a lot of trainings around how to be an upstander, how to be a bystander. When you see something, you see an injustice, you see someone being harmed, what you can do as opposed to just watching it happen. I am so sad that we are out of time. Like, this is really breaking my heart. And you know, my team's gonna hate me for this, but we got to keep this conversation, this going somehow, some way. So I want to brainstorm. The chat has been so live, folks. There's so many good questions and conversations happening. And I know there was one person that was like, is there going to be a community of practice or something? So I'm like, yes, we need to be having more of these conversations. An hour, that's why I said at the top, it's just a little teaser. But I'm gonna close us out. Just love for each of you to any last words that you have, any advice that you have for Black women who are really, you know, particularly in this moment going through it, societally, you know, institutionally, personally. Any last words before I close us out?
Yeah, I know we opened up Ava with practices that we all had that kind of help us get through. One of the things that I hope and wish for everybody is that they're able to create their own practice, because, you know, we're only 6 months in to this administration. We got 4 years, right? And so what are we going to do to, you know, restore ourselves, and to, you know, protect our well-being? You know, one of the things that I do, and I think something that everybody can do, is I have one friend. You don't need a whole community, you don't need a whole village necessarily. I have one friend that I check in on, every day. And we talk about how we're feeling. And we also talk about how we're going to get on to like the other side, right? Um, and this allows me to feel like, okay, I'm not alone. I'm connected. There's somebody that has my back and I have a safe space, right? And so being able to find like what that safe space is to you, where you can go for healing, where you can find energy, is so, so crucial and so important.
Thank you. Carrie, Anik, any last words?
Yeah, I think what has resonated with me a lot is folks that have mentioned the need to just kind of disconnect from our professional identity. I think that's something that I am sitting with right now for myself. Um, I I absolutely align with the stat on Black women being more ambitious, and I have often connected my worth to my productivity. I think
Yes.
Adriana said that in the chat, and really thinking about how I build joy outside of how I make an income has become a really important moment for me to reflect on and really think about what I need. I've often felt like I am worthy by making an impact on the world. And there are ways that I can make an impact on the world outside of who signs my check. And so thinking about that and my purpose is really something I've been wrestling with now.
That's so real. Thank you, Carrie.
Ooh, Carrie, that is so on point. It reminds me of the question that that same therapist I mentioned earlier asked me. She said, Unique, because she's like really trying to get through to me. Unique, do you know you have value, even if you're sitting in a chair and your feet are up, right? You are valuable in and of yourself just because you are alive. And so really like to get to that place though, I think takes a lot of intention, a lot of actual study, you know, political examination of like our relationship to work. And in the resources I'll drop a YouTube clip. It's Audre Lorde talking about the uses of the erotic or the uses of pleasure. And so that's what I would offer. It's like, watch that or read her essay, that essay every day for like 30 days, just to get it in your soul, that we can be valuable. We are valuable just because we are human, and that pleasure and pleasing ourselves and being whole without depending on work for that identity um, can be nourishing and just soft and a beautiful way to live from. And so that's what I would offer Audre Lorde and her work Uses of the Erotic.
Thank you. Thank you. So the two takeaways I'm going to kind of encapsulate here are you, everybody on this call, you have value that is not tied to your productivity, to your workplace productivity, and you are not alone. You are not alone. So thank you all so much. We will continue this in one way or another, I promise you. You know, feel free to reach out to anyone on our partnerships team at YW if you want to think more about how to engage in some of this in your workplace with the diversity, equity, inclusion work. And, you know, if you've enjoyed this, we always welcome support as a nonprofit. So if you want to support us, please consider doing that. Thank you all so much. I will say to be continued. And there are going to be a lot of juicy resources and hopefully more coming your way. So thank you. Thank you, Yannick. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Naisha.